Right this instant, Hauser says, Hauer and D. Top U.S. military officials have confirmed their forces are fully prepared to restart combat operations against Iran. Warships are in position, troops on high alert, and orders are ready to execute immediately, with a blockade already active and tensions exploding. Their what will trigger the first strike? At 0640 a.m. Eastern Time, April 16th, 2026, a senior Pentagon briefing sent shockwaves through Washington and beyond. U.S. Central Command, better known as CENTCOM, quietly elevated readiness levels across multiple theaters, from the Persian Gulf to the Eastern Mediterranean. By 07:15 a.m., internal military communications obtained through insider sources confirmed something far more serious than a routine alert. This was not a drill. This was a combat posture, and here's where things take a dangerous turn. According to confidential informants with direct knowledge of the situation, at least 2 U.S. carrier strike groups have shifted into forward operating positions within striking distance of Iranian targets. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, previously conducting patrol operations, is now reportedly accompanied by guided missile destroyers armed with Tomahawk cruise missiles. At the same time, B-52 bombers have been repositioned to undisclosed bases in the region, bombers capable of delivering precision strikes deep inside Iranian territory within hours. I need you to understand how serious this is. This isn't just posturing. This is the kind of positioning that happens in the final hours before a military operation. Now, officially, U.S. defense officials are using cautious language. Words like preparedness and deterrence are being repeated in press briefings. But behind closed doors, the tone is completely different. One senior defense official, speaking off the record, described the current situation as a hair-trigger environment where any miscalculation could ignite a full-scale conflict. And that brings us to Iran. Inside Tehran, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has reportedly ordered the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, to move key missile units into hardened underground facilities. Satellite imagery analyzed late last night shows increased activity near known missile launch sites, particularly along Iran's southern coast facing the Strait of Hormuz. This is not routine movement. This is preparation. But wait, what happened next will shock you. At approximately 09:20 p.m. local time in the Gulf region, an unidentified aerial object briefly entered restricted airspace near a U.S. naval formation. Within seconds, U.S. air defense systems locked on. Fighter jets were scrambled. For nearly 6 minutes, the situation teetered on the edge of escalation. Then suddenly, the object disappeared. No official explanation has been given. Insider sources suggest it may have been an Iranian surveillance drone testing U.S. response times. Others believe it could have been something far more deliberate, a probe designed to trigger a reaction. And if that's true, then this is no longer just about readiness. This is about provocation. You see, when both sides start testing each other like this, history tells us one thing: escalation becomes almost inevitable. Let's not forget what's already happening on the ground. Over the past 48 hours, U.S. naval forces have intensified enforcement of a maritime blockade targeting Iranian-linked shipping routes. More than 20 vessels have reportedly been intercepted, inspected, or turned away. Commercial shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has dropped sharply, with some companies rerouting entirely to avoid the risk. This is economic pressure, yes, but it's also a military chokehold. And Iran is not sitting still. Confidential informants inside regional intelligence networks indicate that IRGC fast attack boats have increased patrols, while anti-ship missile batteries have been placed on heightened alert. These systems are capable of targeting U.S. warships within minutes. In other words, both sides are now locked in a deadly standoff where a single mistake could trigger catastrophic consequences. Stay with me, because this next part changes everything. There is one detail, one piece of information that has not been publicly confirmed but is being discussed in classified circles right now. A detail so significant that, if true, it could explain why U.S. forces are moving with such urgency and why Iran appears equally prepared for immediate retaliation. According to multiple insider sources, U.S. intelligence may have intercepted communications suggesting an imminent Iranian operation, something covert, something strategic, and something potentially devastating. But here's the problem. No one knows exactly what that operation is or when it might happen. And that uncertainty is what makes this moment so dangerous. Because when military forces operate under incomplete information, decisions are made faster, risks are taken sooner, and the margin for error disappears. I need you to understand how serious this is. We are now at a point where both sides are not just preparing for conflict, they are expecting it. And the longer this tension holds, the more likely it is that something will break. The question is not if, the question is when. And more importantly, who makes the first move? Because what happens next could redefine the balance of power in the Middle East and potentially drag the world into a conflict far larger than anyone is prepared for. But to truly understand how we got here and why this moment feels so different from past escalations, you need to look at the chain of events that led to this breaking point. And trust me, what you're about to hear next will make this situation even more explosive. To understand why U.S. forces are now sitting on a hair trigger, you have to go back, not months, but years, to a pattern that has been building beneath the surface, slowly, quietly, and now violently erupting. The modern phase of this conflict traces back to January 3rd, 2020, when a U.S. drone strike near Baghdad International Airport killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, the head of the IRGC's Quds Force. That single moment shattered whatever fragile balance existed between Washington and Tehran. Within days, Iran retaliated with ballistic missile strikes on U.S. bases in Iraq, injuring over 100 American troops. It was the closest the two nations had come to direct war in decades. But here's what most people don't realize. According to insider sources within regional intelligence agencies, that was only the beginning of a shadow war that never truly ended. From 2021 through 2024, both sides engaged in what military analysts call gray zone warfare, Hasr and Sensor, covert operations, cyber attacks, proxy conflicts across Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, oil tankers mysteriously sabotaged, drones intercepted, militias armed and activated, each move carefully calibrated to avoid full-scale war, but always pushing the line. Then came 2025. In June 2025, a series of coordinated attacks struck U.S.-linked installations in eastern Syria. Official reports blamed unknown militant groups, but confidential informants later revealed ties to IRGC-backed militias operating under deep cover. The U.S. responded with precision airstrikes targeting weapons depots and command centers. Casualties were reported on both sides, but neither government fully acknowledged the scale. This is where the escalation curve started to steepen. By October 2025, maritime tensions surged. Several commercial vessels reported GPS jamming and near-miss encounters with Iranian patrol boats in the Strait of Hormuz. Insurance premiums for shipping skyrocketed. Global markets reacted. And behind the scenes, U.S. naval commanders began drafting contingency plans for a full maritime lockdown. Now, fast forward to April 14, 2026. At exactly 11:30 p.m. Gulf Standard Time, a U.S. reconnaissance drone, later identified as a high-altitude MQ-4C Triton, lost contact over the Persian Gulf. Initial reports described it as a technical malfunction. But what I'm about to tell you next changes everything. Confidential informants with direct access to defense briefings claimed that the drone's last transmission included radar signatures consistent with a surface-to-air missile lock. In plain terms, it may have been targeted. No official confirmation, no public statement, just silence. But internally, that silence triggered alarm. Within hours, by April 15, 2026, 04 a.m. Eastern Time, U.S. defense networks began shifting into elevated readiness. Carrier strike groups received updated operational directives. Air bases in Qatar and Bahrain moved to increased alert status. And most importantly, rules of engagement were quietly revised. This is critical, because when rules of engagement change, it means commanders on the ground are given more authority to act faster and with fewer restrictions. I need you to understand how serious this is. This is how conflicts accelerate from controlled tension to uncontrolled escalation. At the same time, Iran's response has been equally calculated and equally dangerous. Satellite imagery from April 15th shows IRGC missile brigades repositioning near Bandar Abbas, one of Iran's most strategic military hubs along the Strait of Hormuz. These aren't defensive placements. These are offensive postures. Anti-ship missiles with ranges exceeding 300 kilometers, capable of striking U.S. naval assets in minutes. And it doesn't stop there. According to insider sources within regional intelligence circles, Iran has also activated elements of its asymmetric warfare network, fast attack boats, drone swarms, and coastal defense systems designed specifically to overwhelm larger naval forces. These tactics are not theoretical. They've been rehearsed repeatedly over the past decade. Now imagine this scenario. A U.S. warship intercepts a vessel suspected of violating the blockade. Iranian patrol boats move in, communications break down, a warning shot is fired. Within seconds, missiles are launched. Drones fill the sky. And just like that, the situation spirals beyond control. Stay with me, because this next part changes everything. There's another layer to this buildup that hasn't been widely reported, but it's crucial. According to confidential informants embedded within diplomatic channels, backdoor communications between U.S. and Iranian officials have nearly collapsed. These are the emergency lines, the ones used to de-escalate crises before they explode. And right now, those lines are either silent or being ignored. That means if something goes wrong, there may be no immediate way to stop it. Let that sink in. Two military powers, both heavily armed, both on edge, and no reliable communication to prevent disaster. This is how wars start. Not always with a grand declaration, but with a misunderstanding, a miscalculation, or a moment of panic. And right now, all three are in play. By the evening of April 15th, global intelligence agencies were already warning of a high probability escalation window within the next 72 hours. That window is closing fast. We are now inside it. And if you've been following this channel, you already know we don't deal in speculation. We track patterns, movements, signals. And every signal right now is pointing in one direction: conflict. But here's the part no one is talking about publicly. There is a specific trigger, something both sides are watching for, that could instantly flip this situation from tension to open warfare. And that trigger is closer than anyone realizes. If you want real-time breakdowns like this, where we go beyond headlines and into what's actually happening behind the scenes, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. Because in a situation like this, hours matter, sometimes even minutes. Now here's the cliffhanger. In part 3, we're going to reveal what that trigger might be, the one event intelligence officials are quietly preparing for, and why, if it happens, there may be no turning back. Now we come to the moment everything has been building toward, the piece that connects the drone incident, the sudden military readiness, and the silence between Washington and Tehran. Because according to multiple insider sources and confidential informants briefed within the last 12 hours, there is a specific trigger event both sides are preparing for, and it is far more dangerous than anything publicly acknowledged. That trigger is a preemptive strike scenario. Let me explain. Buried inside classified intelligence assessments circulated late on April 15, 2026, U.S. analysts outlined a high-probability scenario in which Iran could launch a limited, deniable strike against U.S. assets, either through proxy forces or disguised naval units, to test American response without immediately triggering full-scale war. But here's the twist. Those same assessments warn that the United States is now prepared to respond as if that strike is direct aggression from Iran itself, not a proxy, not an accident, but a deliberate act of war. And that changes everything, because it removes the buffer. For years, both sides operated in that gray zone where attacks could be blamed on militias, rebels, or unknown actors. And so there are indeed... That ambiguity acted like a safety valve. It slowed escalation. But now, that safety valve is gone. I need you to understand how serious this is. If even a single missile is launched, if even one U.S. ship is hit, the response will not be limited. It will be immediate, direct, and overwhelming. And here's where the situation becomes even more explosive. At 02:10 a.m. Gulf Standard Time on April 16th, encrypted communications intercepted by U.S. intelligence reportedly indicated unusual coordination between IRGC naval units and regional proxy groups. The content of those communications remains classified, but multiple insider sources confirmed that it included operational timing references. Timing references, that means planning. Now pause for a second and think about what that implies. Two forces, both expecting the other to act, both preparing to strike first, both interpreting any movement as confirmation of hostile intent. This is not just tension anymore. This is a countdown. But wait, because what happened next will shock you. At approximately 05:45 a.m. local time, a cluster of fast-moving vessels believed to be IRGC fast attack boats was detected moving in formation near a major commercial shipping lane in the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. surveillance assets tracked the movement in real time. Within minutes, a U.S. destroyer adjusted course and fighter jets were placed on standby. For nearly 20 minutes, the world stood on the edge. Then suddenly, the vessels dispersed. No shots fired, no confrontation. But that moment, those 20 minutes, triggered a cascade of internal alarms across U.S. command structures because it matched almost perfectly with the scenario outlined in those classified assessments. A coordinated approach, a potential interception, a possible strike window, and then withdrawal. Some analysts believe this was a rehearsal. Others believe it was a signal. Either way, it confirms one thing. Both sides are actively testing the threshold of war. Now here's the pattern interrupt you need to hear. According to defense analysts, once military forces reach this level of readiness, this level of forward positioning and psychological tension, the probability of conflict jumps by over 70% within a 72-hour window. 70%? That's not speculation. That's based on decades of historical conflict modeling. And right now, we are inside that window. Stay with me, because this next part changes everything. There's one more detail, one final piece of this puzzle that closes the loop we opened at the very beginning. Remember that unidentified aerial object that entered US-controlled airspace? The one that triggered fighter jet deployment and defensive targeting systems? Well, but according to confidential informants familiar with the incident, it wasn't just a random drone. It was flying at an altitude and speed consistent with a modified reconnaissance platform, one capable of transmitting real-time targeting data. In other words, it may have been mapping U.S. naval positions, mapping them, which means that while U.S. forces were preparing for a potential strike, Iran may have been gathering the exact data needed to execute one. And if that's true, then everything we're seeing right now, the readiness, the repositioning, the silence, it all points to one conclusion. Both sides are no longer preparing for if, and sir nen your feintar indakan. They are preparing for when. I need you to understand how serious this is, because once that first strike happens, whether intentional or accidental, there is no pause button, no reset, no immediate de-escalation, just reaction and escalation, and consequences that ripple far beyond the Middle East. World leaders are already responding behind the scenes. The UK has reportedly raised threat levels for its naval assets in the region. France has increased surveillance flights. Even China has issued internal advisories regarding energy supply disruptions tied to the Strait of Hormuz. This is no longer a regional issue. This in the Sansor ist Sao, this is global. And answer and isti. And yet, despite all of this, there is still one final layer that hasn't been fully revealed. One element that could determine not just how this conflict begins, but how far it goes. Because military readiness is one thing, but actual engagement, that depends on decisions made in seconds under pressure with incomplete information. And those decisions are now closer than ever. Now we need to talk about what happens next, because everything you've heard so far leads to this moment. This is no longer just about military positioning or strategic signaling. This is about consequences, real-world consequences that could unfold in hours, not days, not weeks, hours. And there are three scenarios, three very real paths this situation could take from here, each one more dangerous than the last. The first scenario is what military planners call a limited strike escalation. In this scenario, a single incident, maybe a missile launch, maybe a naval confrontation, maybe even a misidentified drone, triggers a direct U.S. response. Precision airstrikes hit Iranian military infrastructure, missile sites, radar installations, so were the CSE, Andurs and Dad, IRGC command centers. Iran responds quickly but carefully, targeting U.S. bases in Iraq or the Gulf with controlled, measured retaliation. Enough to send a message, but not enough to trigger total war. This would look like a contained conflict. Short-term, localized. But don't let that fool you, because even a limited exchange between two military powers like this would shake global markets overnight. Oil prices could spike above $150 per barrel within hours. Shipping through the Strait of Hormuz could collapse. and millions of people across the region would be pulled into a rapidly deteriorating security situation. Now, here's where it escalates. The second scenario is a regional war breakout. This is where things spiral. A single strike leads to multiple retaliations. Proxy forces activate across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. U.S. bases come under sustained attack. Israel becomes involved. Gulf states mobilize. Air defenses light up across the region. And suddenly, this isn't just U.S. versus Iran anymore. This is an entire region on fire. Insider sources within defense circles warn that in this scenario, the first 72 hours would be the most intense. Hundreds of strikes, I think, and thousands of casualties, airspace closures or something, and cyber attacks disrupting infrastructure. I need you to understand how serious this is, because at that point, there is no clean exit, no simple de-escalation. Every move becomes a reaction to the previous one, and the cycle feeds itself. Now brace yourself, because the third scenario is the one experts fear the most. This is the uncontrolled global escalation scenario. It starts the same way: a strike, a response, but then something goes wrong. A missile hits the wrong target. A civilian vessel is caught in the crossfire, or a third-party nation is pulled in unintentionally. And that's when the lines blur. Major powers begin to take sides. Military alliances activate. Supply chains collapse. Energy routes are disrupted on a scale we haven't seen in decades. And suddenly, what began as a regional standoff becomes something far bigger. Something global. Stay with me, because this next part is critical. Because while all three scenarios are possible, there is one factor that will determine which path becomes reality: decision-making under pressure. Right now, commanders on both sides are operating with incomplete information. Signals are being misread, intentions are being guessed, and every movement, every radar ping, every vessel maneuver, every drone flight is being interpreted through a lens of suspicion. That's how mistakes happen. And in a situation like this, a mistake is all it takes. I need you to understand how serious this is, because we are not watching a slow diplomatic crisis unfold. We are watching a live, dynamic military standoff where outcomes can change in minutes. Right now, as you're hearing this, ships are still in position. Aircraft are still on standby. Missile systems are still locked and ready. Nothing has been de-escalated. Nothing has been resolved. We are still inside that escalation window. And here's the part that makes this moment historic. For the first time in years, both the United States and Iran are operating without a clear buffer and without reliable communication, and with rules of engagement that allow rapid, decisive action. That combination is rare. And when it happens, history tends to follow. Now the question becomes personal, not just for governments, not just for military leaders, but for you. Because events like this don't stay contained forever. They affect global economies, energy prices, security policies, and even daily life in ways most people don't see coming until it's too late. So the real question is, what happens if that first strike comes in the next few hours? And if it does, how far does this go? This is where I want to hear from you. Do you think this situation will stay contained, or are we on the edge of something much bigger? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you want real-time updates, deep analysis, and insider-level breakdowns of events like this as they unfold, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because in moments like this, information is everything. And the next update could change everything.